Hi, welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we are in Acts chapter 14, and we are doing a weekly study through Acts chapter 14. So this is our 60-second series in Acts chapter, or 60-second, 62. There will have been 62 of these by the time this one is finished. So what that means, if you are joining us for the first time, and if you're seeing this video for the first time, that means there are 61 other sessions in the book of Acts leading up to this. And it's difficult. There's so much information. You can't cram everything into one video. So necessarily the information has to be cumulative. And so if you hear lingo or things referenced that you don't understand or may not have heard of, we probably covered it in an earlier session. Okay, so the stuff is there. Now, as we get going, I want to say thanks to everybody who supports the channel. We cannot do this without you, and very thrilled to have the support that we do so that we can continue doing this and continue doing it ad-free. Whenever that dries up, we're either going to quit or monetize, something like that, doesn't matter. But we have something to say, and many of you believe in it, and it's transforming lives for the better, apparently. So that's very gratifying. I'm very, very happy to have those supporting us who do. Now, as we move forward, I want to say that in the coming future, my copy of this book came in recently, Stages of Faith by James W. Fowler. So I would encourage you, if you want to get a copy of that, get a copy of that. This was written by a Christian minister, and the reason I'm saying this came up on the channel recently, and since we are oriented toward a trajectory of growth and transformation and developing one's faith here on this channel, we are going to be doing some videos where we take a look at what Fowler has to say, and we're going to see if there's any signal in there. So as we go forward, I want you to know in advance if you want to order your copy. I couldn't find one digitally. There might, like, I tried Kindle and Apple Books, but it may be somewhere else. Maybe you can get it on the Nook or something. I don't know. But I couldn't get one digitally or on audiobook, so I had to get the old-fashioned paper book, which is against my religion, but I'll set that aside for you guys. So we're going to be taking a look at that in the coming, I don't know, weeks and months, and I want to let you know about that so that in case you want to get your copy. I know there's going to be a bunch of critics right off the bat saying, we should just be studying the Bible. I know. But we are. We're going to study the Bible. So in Acts chapter 14, I want to look at the concept of a will versus a whim. A will versus a whim. In the thumbnail, I have this very famous photo of one dissenter. I think this is from, not that one. This is from I think it's from like a Nazi rally in Nazi Germany where everybody's doing the Heil Hitler salute. And there's one guy, got his arms crossed. He's like, I'm not playing this game. I'm not doing this. And you'll see there's memes of this guy all over the internet. And what I want you to think about this kind of thing as we move forward, as we look at the text, because we have a demonstration in the text of some very fickle people. And it's important for us as sense makers and as meaning makers and meaning finders to understand these dynamics and to understand how to avoid putting ourselves in a situation where the will of the people versus the whim of the people winds up taking, the whim of the people versus the will of the people winds up taking precedence and gets foregrounded. So let's look up, why did I choose whim and will, okay? The will is somebody's informed volitional decision to do something. That's what we're going to say the will is for the sake of this conversation. A whim is a capricious or eccentric and often sudden idea or turn of the mind. A whim, okay? Capricious. I had to look up capricious, all right? Because it says a capricious or eccentric and often sudden idea. So I looked up capricious. This is how I think you ought to do things, by the way. When you hear words that you don't understand, look them up, all right? Capricious is given to sudden and unaccountable changes of mood or behavior. And the example sentence is, it's terrible to feel our livelihood hinges on a capricious boss, okay? So, Yeah, we could pass this around, like the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Speaking of passing books around, there's this term called, by the way, we get that from one of these comments. There's this term, passing books around, term called sleeper books. And if you go into somebody's study who's a typical whatever, what you'll find is you'll find books by Ruckman and Larkin and maybe a Schofield reference Bible underneath like stacks of other things at the bottom of the shelf with something hanging over it kind of thing. And then people pass them around, but nobody ever admits to have read them or getting their information from them because they don't want to be associated with all the accusations that come along, all the boogeymen that come along with being associated with a particular source. So what happens in Iconium? Paul is coming to Iconium. He's got Barnabas with them, and the unbelieving Jews stir up the Gentiles and make their minds evil affected against the brethren. So they abode long time, therefore, speaking boldly in the Lord, which gave testimony unto the word of his grace, and granted signs and wonders be done by their hands. Now that's pretty amazing that signs and wonders are being done by their hands, and that's still not convincing enough for this to be a decisive. Obviously, these guys are showing up with good news, right? But the multitude of the city was divided, okay? Part held with the Jews and part held with the apostles. So I would want to pause right there and I want to ask myself this question: what do I do? If I'm in that situation and I have some kind of message to deliver, and I find myself in a crowd of people or a multitude of people or even a small group of people where there is a division, what should I do about it? Okay? And there's one of the goals of this channel is to develop the requisite amount of skill sets so that you could behave, you can conduct yourself with a certain degree of sovereignty in a situation like that, to where you could accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish, while not stepping over that bound, having the wisdom to perceive and discern what's a bridge too far, try to push the issue a little too far, and then what is it you're trying to do, and are we, I heard somebody say recently that they don't think evangelism was their gift. I think it was the guy that came on our extemporaneous Zoom session that we had. Evangelism really isn't his thing. And I think what some people mean by that, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but some people, I think the idea is that harvesting isn't their thing. Like actually getting people to make the decision to commit to Jesus Christ isn't really their thing. But to me, evangelism should probably involve a lot more vineyard tending than decisive operations, if that makes sense, especially in this environment. Okay, you got to think about the apostles, where they were at that time and the way news spread. They're living in a time where a lot of people have not heard of Jesus of Nazareth at all, and they are spreading this information, and there's a certain reason for it at that time. And I think for the sake of humanity that it goes way beyond just the salvation of the individuals at the time. But I think that the story of Jesus Christ is very important for the development of mankind on planet Earth as well. And it needed to be told at that time in a certain way. Now we are in a different situation. We're in a situation, now I say we, I'm in the United States, I'm in Louisiana, okay? I'm in a situation where everybody has already heard some version of Jesus Christ, and most people already have some kind of opinion about it, okay? And they know the basic story, okay? So if I'm trying to approach somebody evangelistically, it's not just giving them that information necessarily. It's not that they lack the information. It's that with them, it has some kind of bad branding for some reason. And I have to find out what that is. Okay. And finding out what that is, going around frantically trying to get everybody to just stop everything they're doing and commit to this idea that you're trying to spread, it might not be such a good thing to do here. Now notice that what Paul and them are doing, it says, long time therefore abode they, speaking boldly in the Lord. Every once in a while, they'll show up and they just have like 3 Sabbaths with like the Thessalonians. They just have a short amount of time with people, and you wind up getting a lot of converts. But when they can, they take their time and stay there and tries to develop these ideas and thoughts and things like that. So I want you to think about that sort of thing. I just tried to overlay Fowler's stages over Larkin's stages of dispensations. That would be funny. I've been watching a few people that I wouldn't have before, thinking outside the box, and it's awesome. Yes. So yeah. So I appreciate that comment that Elizabeth Hoffman just made. What we're trying to do is that metanoia, that expenditure of the mind to think outside the ways that you've thought before, or to at least be considered, at least to be exposed to, so that one can consider those kinds of things. Somebody needs to slip me the sleeper book list. I used to hide mine in a cabinet. Now I have them proudly displayed on the bookshelf, even if he is a heretic. Heretics unite. Yes, indeed. So you want to think about, just because you see something in the book of Acts doesn't mean it's being done in the best way possible for your situation. It might not even be done in the best way possible for that situation. This is just a record of what happened. They're not telling you how much wisdom these people brought with them at the time, okay? So you want to think about that and think very, very seriously about the kind of influence you're having on other people, the kind of, and how much wisdom you need to bring to that situation. Now, there's a real problem here. What's the real problem? The multitude of the city was divided, part held with the Jews, part held with the apostles. And the Jews came along. The unbelieving Jews came and stirred up the Gentiles and made their minds evil affected against the brethren. So you have... you have the multitude of the city divided, and then eventually it turns violent. There's an assault made both of the Gentiles and of the Jews with their rulers to use them despitefully and to stone them. So this is a time for Ron Burgundy to say, wow, this escalated quickly, okay? So now they want to kill them. They want to stone them. This is not a situation that you would want to be in. And I do not advocate virtuous martyrdom. I don't advocate martyrdom as a way of conveying virtue, because what happens when you're martyred, you know what happens? You die, and then whatever agency you may have had in this world is over. Okay, so I advocate finding a way to be tactful and work on people at a level that is appropriate to their receptivity, and kind of massage that a little bit in your interactions with them, rather than just being so, people hear of, we glorify martyrs so much, and I'm not saying there's something wrong with if somebody happens to be martyred, but it's not something you want to seek after. And we tend to substitute victimhood for virtue. And there's a lot of people who believed wrong things, or things that we would disagree with. Who says they're wrong, right? There's people who believe things that we would disagree with from other religions that were martyred, okay? And so just because somebody is martyred doesn't mean that they are virtuous necessarily, or that they were right, okay? We're still going to consider the signal and the noise of what they have to say, just like we would anybody else. And the fact of how it ended, if it ended violently, does not mean at all that anything that they had to say was any more true than anything else anybody else has to say. All it means is that whatever they were doing was disruptive enough to cause somebody else to want to kill them. That's all it means. And you need to understand that. And there's no, I think there is like a martyr's crown or something like that in the Bible, but there's no badge of honor, like Peter says, if you have it coming to you. Okay? So it's not glorious or virtuous to get yourself stoned or martyred just for stonings or martyrdom's sake. You want to do that. You want to try to avoid that if at all possible. And if it's not possible, then, whatever, so be it. But if it is possible. So you have these people divided, and you want to ask yourself this question. Now I want to pose you another question. Then I want to talk about a mindset that I want us as Christians to avoid big time. A mindset that I want us to avoid. So can you imagine with me that this would be a difficult situation to be in? You're in a situation where the city is divided. You have some information you're trying to put out and support about this guy, Jesus of Nazareth, who is the savior of the world, right? You're trying to put this information out, and half of the people are against you, and then the people that are against you turn violent on you. What kind of wisdom do we bring to this scenario? Could Paul and Barnabas have done anything differently at different stages? What if this? Everywhere Paul goes, he goes to the Jew first and then to the Greeks, and we say there's reasons for that. What if he didn't go to the Jews at all? Therefore, they wouldn't be getting jealous. Therefore, they wouldn't be stirred up and pursuing and come chase these people around and and getting these people killed. It'd be an interesting thing to think about. So you want to think about who you're talking to and what the consequences are of what you're putting down, and then you want to be able to predict how disruptive it might be to any particular societal structure if people embrace what you're saying. And that disruption could take place at a very small level. It could just, disrupt and cause drama at the local sports complex where you play in leagues. Or it could, be threatening to an entire country's governmental system. You never know. So before you open your mouth and say something, or before you start a movement or whatever, I want you to think about the kind of impact that what you're saying is going to have. And I'm not saying that would cause you to draw back and not say it, but I'm saying that you need to know what you're getting yourself into, okay? Am I saying they didn't know what they're getting into? I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that we need to understand that. So that's a difficult question. What would you do? So I would ask myself a couple of questions. If I was Paul and Barnabas, could I have approached this in a different way to prevent the city from being divided, half against me and half for me? And is there anything that I could have done to prevent these people from turning violent and trying to make an assault against us so that we have to run out of town? And they fled into other cities, into Lystra and Derbe, cities of Laconia, and unto the region that lieth round about. So is there anything that I could have done to prevent that from happening? I don't know. But you can imagine that Paul, now the next thing happens is even worse. Or more, I don't know, kind of outstanding on the degree of the way things happen. Now think about this. When Paul, let's go ahead and show you that. Let's look a little further in the chapter. Paul gets to Lystra and he winds up healing this guy who's impotent from his birth. His legs are, so he can't walk. So this guy is impotent in his feet, being crippled from his mother's womb, who never had walked. And the same heard Paul speak steadfastly, perceiving that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand upright on thy feet." And he leapt and walked. And when other people saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in the speech of Laconia, "The gods are come down in the likeness of men." And they called Barnabas Jupiter and Paul Mercurius, because he was the chief speaker. Now I want to talk more about this from a different angle when we get to it, but I want to tell you this. You would call this response positive. What we're going to talk about is how people tend to interpret phenomenon in accordance with the paradigm through which they see the world. And as you can see, the interpretation same facts. I mean, Paul and Barnabas are there. They did heal a guy. So the evidence is the same, but the interpretation of the evidence is what is different. That's something you need to understand when you go into the realm of science too. All the evidence that anybody has for all the different theories, the evidence is the same. There is no evidence for or against a particular thing. There's the interpretation of the evidence. The evidence is just the evidence. So the evidence is here, and if you believed in Jupiter and in Mercury, you would think that, okay, this, in accordance with what we believe, this must be them. But the worldview is wrong. But you would say this is a positive response. Now look how fickle the people are. The priest of Jupiter, which was before their city, I want to talk about that word when we get to it as well. That's very important. Would have done sacrifice with the people, so they want to worship them as gods. I mean, you would think that that's a good scenario. You're like C-3PO with the Ewoks, and you can tell them all what to do, right? Oh, they see it as a bad thing. Well, later on, with these sayings, he scarce restrained the people, and they had not done sacrifice unto them. Then there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium, who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing that he had been dead. Talk about a flip-flop. Talk about a a radical reversal of of valence. Okay, and when I say valence, I'm talking about the basic attraction towards something positive or negative. So you could have a positive valence, which makes you want something, like when you're attracted to somebody of the opposite sex, or the same, whatever, or a negative valence when you're, repelled by somebody and you don't want to be around when you don't like somebody. And then there's a word you probably use more often, ambivalence. Okay, when you don't, ambivalence means it's not really positive or negative, or there's a mixture of positive and negative, that kind of thing. Ambivalence. So that's where the word valence probably shows up most often in our vocabulary. But there's this valence. So they have this very positive valence toward Paul and Barnabas, and then that valence gets turned very negative. There's no ambivalence there. It's all positive to all negative. And another way to say that is very polarizing. It's very polarized. So they love you or hate you, and now they're ready to stone them. So it's crazy fickle people who they vacillate and they can't make up their minds. You need to understand people operate this way. I think in Men in Black, Agent K tells Will Smith's character, I forget what letter he had, he tells him, a person is smart, but people are stupid. And Ann Coulter has a book called Demonic, which basically says the same thing, but takes a book to do it. People, the Bible has, the maniac of Gadara has this demon in him. He says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And Ann Coulter develops that out to the idea that a crowd of people can basically function as a demon. You can turn them into a demon. You can get the whim of the people acting like a demon. And so the question is, how would you, as a Christian or as a person who wants to make good sense, which is what we want to do, how would you prevent this? So I think this is heavy. This is heavy on Paul's mind when he writes things. Now, we like Ephesians 4 around here. We like all the Bible, right? But we found something in Ephesians 4. And one of the things we don't want to be, and when Paul says things like this, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine. Paul is thinking, this is probably weighing on his mind. By the time Paul is writing Ephesians, okay, he's in prison, probably toward the end of his life. This happened much, much earlier. I think this kind of thing is weighing on him all the time. Man, we went to these cities, and it was so easy for these people to come in and just sway everyone's opinion. They're all for us, and then, man, they're all against us. Is there not anybody there who can make good sense, right? Is there not anybody there who can make good sense of the situation, who can not just be thrown about so easily with all these, contending ideologies and jump back and forth so polarized, so far, so fast? What is it that causes these people to be this way? I think that kind of thing is weighing on Paul's mind. Why, when they're in Iconium, why are they willing to make an assault and try to come stone us? And when before it was half the city was divided, half was for, half was against, and then these people came, and they were able, the Jews dissuaded all the people to be against them, the evil affected against the brethren. Why are they susceptible to that? I think Paul's asking that question. Why are these people susceptible to that, right? In chapter 17, we're going to see that the Bereans, they're not hostile at all. They're lost people, by the way. When people say we need to be good Bereans, when the Bereans were searching the scripture daily to see whether those things were so, they were lost. Lost people, what a Calvinist would say is a totally depraved person, but they would have to back off of that and say that they were like maybe slightly less totally depraved because maybe they're being giving ears to hear or something like that. They have to see, Calvinists have to work their ideology back into the narratives and have it say have things happening that the text doesn't say. So they have to basically have a person be getting regenerated slowly, a little bit at a time. Instead of you just regenerated, maybe first it's their ears so that they can hear the gospel, and then the stirring in their heart and the drawing so that they're receptive, all this kind of nonsense, okay? But those are all post hoc rationalizations. And if you were a Calvinist, you would have to invent those post hoc rationalizations, which makes the whole endeavor rather tedious and uninteresting. Completely uninteresting, as far as I'm concerned. Now, we may have to have a little bit of a allergy. Allergy break complete. So Paul's got this on his mind. How would you do that? Now, if I were to pose this question, is this thing that I'm very concerned about Christians today? Because how would you pose this question today? If I were to ask Christians, how can we bring wisdom to a situation like this, to where this kind of polarization doesn't happen in people? Now that's the heavy duty thinking that the founders of our country had to go through. How do we capture the will of the people without the whim of the people, without somebody being able to stir everyone up and make them so rapidly polarized? How do we capture the will of the people without being subjected to the whim of the people? Because that's a hard question. It's a very hard question. It's so hard that most of humanity has been living under monarchies all their life because that's such a hard question. If you want to have self-ruled people, that's a tough question to answer. And a lot of Christians, when you ask tough questions to Christians, I get answers like this. Well, we're not going to have to worry about that for long because, we'll be raptured and we'll be in heaven. It'll all be over soon. We don't have to worry about it. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is not the way to approach life. Just because a problem is difficult to address doesn't mean that it's not worth addressing and committing yourself to and taking voluntary responsibility for it. So before the age of the revolutions, with the French Revolution, the American Revolution, they basically had monarchies everywhere. And you might get a good king, you might get a tyrant king. And so in order to have orderly governance that was updated frequently enough, and that to not become stale or stagnant or a new kind of chaos, and not have tyranny and not have oppression, was very, very rare. Every once in a while, you might have a good king where you had that. You might have a Solomon or somebody, okay? But then you get Rehoboam. You get more Rehoboams than you get Solomons, and that's a real problem for human history. So in order to avoid that problem, you have to solve some really big problems. And that, you think of the founders of our country, they're like, how do we find a way to let the people govern themselves, but without them being so easily dissuaded and polarized on whims, on these narrative warfare kind of whims, where they can be all for something one minute and all against something the next minute. And I think that's the kind of thing that's on Paul's mind here. And I want us to raise our capacity to the kind of Christians need to be the kind of people who address these problems head on and not run from them. I think because of the narrative of heaven and the rapture and the afterlife, I'm not saying those things are wrong. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that if you think of, and I'm putting this lens on, I'm not saying that I believe this happened this way necessarily, but what I'm saying is if you were to imagine that, let's say all faith systems and all religious systems evolved in mankind's societies, and they all they all select for certain things which cause the groups that adhere to them to survive better, right? And I think maybe you've heard stories before about how when people went from hunter-gatherer societies and then they go to agricultural societies, the invention of the plow basically really changes everything. All the gods and goddesses, they go more masculine and less feminine, and people start getting enough caloric storage where they can have more families, and then your population starts to explode. Then you have land ownership because you have to work the land, and then you have inheritance rights, and then pregnant women can't push the plow because they lose their babies, and so the men become dominant, becomes more patriarchal for these kinds of reasons. And then you have religions that develop to back up the way the technology has affected the society. Now, am I saying Christianity and Judaism came about that way? I'm not saying that at all, but it is an interesting lens to look through. And if sometimes I ask the question, what kind of people does this attract? What kind of people does this tend to attract? Now, I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me in trouble or cut off the air, and I'll try to be as discreet as possible. But on the Joe Rogan show recently, they had somebody on who went to the headquarters of a very popular Christian denomination, spent many years there, and came out and decided that the way they have their hierarchical structure with their vow of celibacy and whatnot it tended to attract gays and pedophiles. And there was all this thing going on inside the denomination where the people were saying, I don't want anybody to find out what I do with kids, and so as long as you don't tell what I do with kids, I won't tell anybody what you do with other men. And this is very well researched and had interviews, and of course it's not popular to come out with that opinion. But that's the result. But whether or not that's true isn't my point. The point is, could it be that a particular belief system or belief structure or idea around God and metaphysics and the afterlife tends to attract people that think a certain way? And if evangelical type fundamentalism type of Christianity that I came up in tends to attract a certain kind of people, to me, it tends to attract people who are less willing to take responsibility in this life because they can offload things off to the afterlife. Oh, one day we're going to get to heaven. We're not going to have to worry about any of that. Instead of trying to solve the hard problem, think about the founders of the United States. Think about the hard problem it is to solve, to stop being a monarchy under King George III and to start being something else governed in an entirely different way. And you have to solve problems like this. You have to find a way to get the will of the people without the whim of the people. Very, very difficult problem to solve. And if you had a bunch of Christians who were just saying, well, we're not going to have to worry about any of this in the afterlife. We're all going to be with Jesus. We're all going to see the saints and that kind of thing. That attitude, it really bothers me. And I feel like sometimes the way our style of Christianity that we have is so focused on the afterlife that it tends to attract people who, number one, aren't willing to take on responsibility to solve hard problems. And number two, it may tend to attract unintelligent people. Yes, I'm saying that. Because solving these problems is hard, and it's a lot easier just to say Jesus is going to fix everything rather than apply yourself to try to solve a hard problem. That's what I'm saying. So I do think that because of the structure of how Christianity has been presented, and I think it's a kind of our fault, the way we've presented it. I'm not saying Christianity itself, as it is in the Bible, is problematic. What I'm saying is the institutional kind of structures along with the belief systems that we have created tends to attract people who have a lot of heart they want to be right, but they don't have the will to take responsibility, nor do they have the mind to do the correct thing, even if they want to take responsibility. It tends to attract people who aren't willing to take responsibility and or who aren't intelligent enough to have to solve problems because we have a problem solver coming for us and we don't have to. So I encounter this a lot in Christianity. A lot of people they think that because God is in control and God has everything going, that means they can disengage, that they don't have to be involved in the solution of any difficult problems. They just need to make sure they take care of themselves, and as long as they pray for the world every day, God will take care of the rest of it. But God works in and through us. He doesn't work without us. If God is going to do something in this world, He's going to do it through you and me. That's how He's going to do it. And so we have to apply ourselves to that. So when you have a situation where you have heart but no will and no mind, it is very easy to have moralistic framework. And what this does, what our moralistic belief systems do for us, is they cause us to be, they cause us to feel more righteous while being less effective. Now that would actually be, if you were conducting psychological warfare, that's what you would want to do to the people that you wanted to destroy. You would want to have them embrace a belief system that made them feel more righteous and more moral for having embraced it, but also make them less effective. I think those are the words that Daniel Schmachenberger used for COINTELPRO back in the 60s. So what happened is, the idea is that There were some people who may have wanted to start a revolution in the United States, 50s, 60s, 70s, and COINTELPRO got behind the backing of postmodernism, Foucault and Derrida and those kinds of guys. Because if you can get those people to embrace postmodernism, they will feel more righteous for embracing the ideology while also being less effective, and therefore less likely to actually be able to mount up a revolution and overthrow the United States government. So that's what they're trying to do. So what they did, they actually gave them a belief system. They delivered straight to them a belief system that would make them feel more righteous but less effective, so they actually didn't have to worry about being overthrown. that's pretty ingenious. It's pretty ingenious. And I think that's what Christianity is for a lot of people. We Christians, we could really turn the world upside down if we would put more will and mind into what we're doing. We got the heart, like we interested in what's right, but we've been hoodwinked into virtue signaling a set of morals that go along with a paradigm that make us feel righteous and holy, and then we offload everything to the afterlife. Oh, Jesus is going to fix everything. Everything's going to be good after the rapture and in heaven. Therefore, I don't have to do anything here. So all the people who aren't Christians, they just effectively shut us down. We aren't doing anything to change the world for the worse or for the better or in any way at all because we've offloaded everything to the afterlife. That is a problem. I grew up with some songs. My household, we grew up with a bunch of Southern Baptist stuff. And a lot of Southern Baptist songs are about heaven and going to heaven. And I used to think this was cool. Here's one song here. They usually get a guy with a low voice to sing this. I do not have a low voice. And he would sing this song. This old house once knew my children. This old house once knew my wife. This old house was a home and comfort as we fought the storms of life. This old house once rang with laughter. This old house heard many shouts. Now she trembles in the darkness when the lightning walks about. Ain't gonna need this house no longer, ain't gonna need this house no more. Ain't got time to fix the shingles, ain't got time to fix the floor. Ain't got time to oil the hinges, nor to mend no window pane. Ain't gonna need this house no longer, I'm getting ready to meet the saints. Alright, I used to sing that and think it was great. But there's some problems with this. The house in this song is you're thinking of a house with window panes and shingles, but really it's a metaphor for the body. Like I'm getting old, I'm getting decrepit, and all this other stuff is going away. So I don't have time. And what I'm getting out of this is I don't have time to fix the shingles or fix the floor or oil the hinges or mend the window pane because I'm not going to need this house no longer. And I think that gets extended. Like you might think that of your body. Maybe you're, 103 and it's inevitable you're going to die. And that's one. But this whole kind of attitude of if you're going to treat your body that way, you come to a certain place where you stop trying to keep going. And in this world, like the house is kind of a picture of you whenever you dream about it, they say. If you get to the point where you stop trying to fix the house, you stop trying to fix the pot, the temple, the house, and then you stop trying to do things agentically in society, in your community, on the planet. You stop trying to make a difference on this house. I think this attitude, it's difficult to take this attitude and not have it extended out into everything else that you do. Okay? And so you're not worried, like fixing the shingles, fixing the floor, you're not worried about how to raise the capacity of people so that they can make good sense of a will and not be subject to their own whims. These people got limbically hijacked. These people in Acts 14, they got limbically hijacked to do dumb things. So if you're so focused on the next life and you might stop worrying about fixing the shingles and the floor and the hinges. And then everything starts, like this world starts, everybody says it's worse, the world's getting worse and worse and worse. And you might think that morally for whatever reasons, but if you look at Steven Pinker's research, a lot of things are actually getting better. What are Christians doing? What role do Christians have in things getting better? I mean, there's percentage-wise, there's less starvation than there ever was before. There's it's interesting because there's more people starving, but there's a lower percentage of people starving because there's a lot more people on planet Earth. But those kinds of things. Why? What are Christians doing to try to make things better on this earth? Okay, as Jesus said, "I've told you of earthly things. If it's not true, how can you believe me when I tell you of heavenly things?" What about us? When if we have no agency here on this planet, then we've been hoodwinked. We've been hoodwinked. So I don't want to get hoodwinked like this. There's another song. Sometimes this gets sung in a medley. After you sing that song, then you sing this one. It's a great morning, your first day in heaven, when you stroll down the golden avenue. There are mansions left and right, and you're thrilled at every sight, and the saints are always smiling, saying, "How do you do?" Well, what about now? I just woke up this morning with my wife, and I said, "I feel good." Why? And it just so happens the past, I guess, 3 years, she and I have made a series of decisions that have made everything in life better. I mean, it's better spiritually, it's better physically, it's better financially, it's better relationally, everything by any metric you can think of, especially when you get to what is authentic and not like a reality bubble. By every metric you can think of, everything is so good and so better. And I don't want to downplay the idea of what awaits in the afterlife, but there are some great things in this life that you can have now. My breakfast is catching up with me. That you can have right now. And so I think this kind of thinking, it's a great day, your first day in heaven. It can be a great day. You can have some really great days if you aim for something and try to make it happen in your life now. And it can be a great day not only for you, but for a whole bunch of other people in your life if you charitably, agapically reach out and exercise your agency to make situations better. All right? So I want to know if y'all are following me on this, if you understand what I'm trying to say here. I want to see if we can look at a few commentations here. Okay, let's look at this comment from Seraphim. How are you doing, Seraphim? Good to see you here. Hey, all the scripture, redeem the time, means nothing less than transform the world into the new earth by transfiguring egoism through repentance and metanoia. And no matter what anybody thinks about the afterlife, I definitely think that Christians should be doing this. Maybe you're not an amillennialist out there metaphysically in your belief system, but why not exercise your agency to make this to make this life better anyway? Why not do that? And this whole concept of heaven, your first day in heaven, if you read the Bible anyway, we're actually not going to be spending a whole lot of time there. We have all these Southern gospel songs about heaven, but when you read the Bible, we're probably going to spend very little time there, and there's going to be there's a millennial reign of Christ, and then there's the new heaven and the new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness, and this kingdom there shall be no end. There's going to be this vast expansion in the future that we're supposed to be able to take part of. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. But to have this kind of playing the harp on a cloud kind of mindset, it's not going to be like that. We're going to be doing things. We're going to be doing things as reality continues. Whatever comes next, we're going to be doing something. The Spirit carries on. And what happens is a lot of Southern Baptists start thinking of heaven in terms like these for these songs. And it's the Jehovah's Witnesses that come along and correctly tell them, hey, we're actually not going to spend a lot of time in heaven. There's the reign of Jesus Christ, new heavens, new earth. They point out the same thing that I just told you. And as far as that goes, they are right. And it's not actual Southern Baptist doctrine necessarily as it is these oft-repeated colloquial ideas of heaven per se, even though I'd have to double-check that on the doctrine thing. I'm not real fresh on what the Baptist Faith and Message has to say about that. Life more abundant, though. But if you believe in Christ and you have life more abundant, you can have life more abundant anywhere, anyhow. And Paul said the things that the things that I God exercises profiteth little, but godliness is profitable to all things, to the life that now is and the life that is hereafter. I'm going to take a few minutes to put an idea in your head. I'm going to change channel. Let me see a few more comments first. Let me see a few more comments. We're kind of running out of time. I don't know if I'm enough time to get to that idea. We might have to do that. All the way to heaven is heaven. See, I think there's some signal in that. Like, you can, just as you can through resentment make your life a living hell here on earth, you can make it a whole lot better than it is too, by making good, wise choices and exercising agapically. Let me back up a little bit and see what we got here. Paul uses the example of Moses and sorcerers comparison to what he's facing. Mark 15:39. Cool, thanks to you guys. I'll read them after this. Christians need to focus on epistemics rather than ontology. Yeah, I would agree with that, because we're so focused on how many angels can dance on the head of a pin that we can't make good sense here and now dealing with people. How do we deal with people in a wise way? How do we make good sense? How do we find good meaning in life? How do we do that? Right? I watch Joe Rogan from time to time. Yeah. So this is a little clip that popped up, and I just clicked on it because I had I had a few minutes, and I happened to be driving somewhere where I had about that same amount of time on the road, so I just clicked it and watched it. So yeah, every once in a while, that's a very interesting show. They need to focus more on pistis, faith, rather than truth claims. Yeah, taking the pistis faith is all mixed up with the word, the history of the words faith and belief. They're mixed up with the words like commitment and love, something like that, and committing to something in love, including people and a future imaginal end state that is better than the current one. Committing to that, like Noah building the ark. He did that in faith. Okay, faith isn't something that you sit around and wait for the ark to build itself. Noah moved with fear. But the Bible says by faith he did that. Okay, so what is the ark that you have to build? What is the thing that you have to do? And faith, doing something here on this planet, is, you need to worry about that more than you worry what the ontology, the truth claim. When we say ontology, we're talking about the things that really are. Like, what substance is the Holy Spirit made out of? Does it matter? Okay. What are you going to solve with that? Don't worry about that. People get all wrapped around the axle on the idea of the Trinity and other things like that. And those are, they're just words. They have to point at something. Think about the things that the words point to. And then there's some kind of there's some kind of pattern of that reality that is here that we need to concern ourselves with. These churches are more ministry oriented than scriptural authority. I'm not sure what that means. Heaven is not discussed in the Torah in order to emphasize the necessity to do what's right because of what's right, and not for the reward to avoid punishment. So in the Torah is the 5 books of Moses. You have this, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, you have this agreement, the covenant with the people that Moses, on behalf of God, makes with the people. If you do right and follow my laws and commands, you will prosper in the land. If you don't, you will not prosper in the land. It's basically that simple. It's a cause and effect scenario here on this planet. And there's something like that. Israel as a nation, stretched out across its history, is a good example of a human growing and going through of a single human in their lifetime, going through different stages of growth, doubt, and belief, and that kind of thing. If you haven't, you should check out John Doyle. He's did a great job teaching Christianity to politics. Tying Christianity to politics. Super interesting. Faith in action, government is his niche. That's very interesting too. I've been going on a political talk show at 103.9 WYAB, I think it is, in Jackson, Mississippi, and we're going to be going back on live in studio on April 4th. So I'm kind of getting tugged into politics lately because of that. Yeah, it's an inconvenient truth. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. Yes, and I think what we get in Christianity, we get a lot of heart, and and then the whole idea of mind and strength and will, we don't get a lot of that. You just get the heart and soul, maybe, or at least nominally. But committing your mind, upgrading, committing yourself to an upgrading of the mind so that you can be more agentic. Christians think that because we believe in Christ, we don't have to do anything like that. No, we are commanded to love the Lord our God with all our will, all our mind. If you could put the mind and the will into what you're doing, you could be more agentic instead of just feeling righteous about believing something while being less effective. We want to be effective at making changes. That's what one person described as what it means to exist. Somebody who can actually interact in the interact in the world in a way that results in changing it. We aren't doing anything to transform ourselves, never mind the world. True. We need to start with yourself, transform yourself, work its way out to the world. Really got me thinking about how to take action in today's world as a Christian. Absolutely. And I hope it does. That's what I want to do. I want to provoke you and me to be thinking about how to take action in the world today, to do what we can to make the world that's around us, make the world a better place. I know that sounds like such a cliche, but my world is such a better place than it was 4 years ago. So much better. And I want that for everybody. I want that for everybody. No reason that can't happen. I ain't got time. They're saying that I don't have meaning. I remember Seraphim bringing that up before. So Seraphim recommends the book by Jacob Needleman on time as the go-to resource for this idea. So I actually might write that down. Jacob Needleman's book on time. We're already got this book over here that we just got. I can only take so many book recommendations at one time. I need stuff that's digital. If you're going to recommend books in the future, I need stuff that's in Kindle so it can fit on my iPad. I'm out of shelf space. What I want to do next time, I want to explore this idea of. Here's an interesting thing that I want to talk about a little bit. The word before in Acts 14:13. Then the priest of Jupiter, which was before their city, brought in oxen garlands unto the gates and would have done sacrifice with the people. Now that word before is the same word that shows up as before the foundation of the world in Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4. We are going to do an experiment, an inductive method experiment, to where if we understand the word this way, instead of as time, how that would affect the meaning of Ephesians 1:4. And in order to do that, I'm going to use an illustration of if you were to create an AI environment, what all it would have to include, because if we were to create an environment, it would have to be an AI environment. And I know that we are actual conscious agents and we're sentient, we're not AI, but I have to use a model, and all models break down at some point. So we're going to use a model there to explain what Ephesians 1:4 might mean if the word before is taken as it is used here in Acts 14:13. And I think that's going to be very interesting. And that would also be, it would have impacts on Calvinism and other things as well. That would be kind of interesting. So we're going to do that next time. The word before. That's what I want to talk about next time. Now this time we are almost at the 1 hour mark. I think we've got enough to handle for the day to call it a day. And I really want us to focus on exercising our agency in this world, in this life, becoming a wiser person, figuring out what we can do to make little situations better. And it's big and grandiose to say to make the world a better place, but start with something that bothers you that you can change. And it could just be something simple like the stack of papers in the corner of the room that need to be gone through. It could be something simple like that. I want you to start finding things around you that aren't great, that are either bother you or tedious or things that need to be done, and just start doing them. Start making the time to do the things that need to be done, and then the capacity to do such things will be recursive, and you will be able to do more over time. All right? And then you'll be able to include more people in love with their own ability to do this to a greater degree than they could before. And then eventually, You start small with the stack of papers in the corner of the room that need to be gone through, and then eventually maybe you're involved with something that really is changing the world. You never know. But I want us all to think about what we can do in this life. My life is fantastically amazing. So much more than it was when I was an ideologically possessed Baptist. And I want other people to experience this. It's so great. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.